Welcome back. In a landmark case that pits institutional policy against fundamental human rights, Lawyers for Human Rights is preparing for a legal battle against the Department of Correctional Services. The case centers on the alleged denial of essential gender-affirming healthcare to a transgender individual currently incarcerated in a South African prison. The lawsuit argues that the prison's failure to provide continuous and adequate medical treatment for gender dysphoria, including access to hormone therapy and consultation with specialists, constitutes cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment and a severe violation of the inmate's constitutional rights. Let's talk about this with Nyeleti Baloyi from Lawyers for Human Rights. A very good evening to you, Nyeleti. Please, if you could please start by explaining what gender-affirming healthcare is and what it entails.
Thank you so much. Good evening, Masa. Thank you for having us. At the crux of it, the request for gender-affirming healthcare is a request for our client, Ntabiseng Mokoena, to be given an opportunity to consult with healthcare practitioners, as well as to be afforded the opportunity to receive hormonal therapy. That is the precise request that she brought to court today, in actual fact. But hormonal, gender-affirming care is very wide-ranging, and it takes place in different levels. But at this particular juncture, her request is to be able to be seen by health professionals, as well as being afforded hormonal therapy.
And what are the biological or health dangers of not providing this kind of medical care when it comes to, the hormonal care as well that you've just mentioned?
The dangers are that because Ntabiseng identifies as a woman, not being afforded that hormonal therapy places her in a difficult situation where she is unable to, conform with her current identity and her hormonal makeup. And she explained to court, in fact, today in detail how this would help her feel dignified and be able to reconcile with the gender that she identifies with.
The Department of Correctional Services, like all departments in government, is overstretched. I mean, you list continuous medical treatment, access to hormone therapy, etc. Does the department actually have the capacity to provide these services?
Well, that is in fact true that the department is overstretched. However, the provision of hormonal therapy is accessible for them to afford in Ntabiseng this treatment. As they mentioned, this treatment is afforded in public hospitals in South Africa, which inmates are able to access public health hospitals, as well as health practitioners that are present in the prison are able to administer that treatment. Should it be allowed for her to receive.
And I guess there's a lot of lack of understanding when it comes to, topics like this as well, because also some might say that what about inmates who suffer from chronic conditions, illnesses that they have to get, medication for, but are also on some long waiting list or also not receiving that. With the limited resources that government has, who should they be prioritizing here?
Well, the request for hormonal therapy for Ntabiseng, every case should be considered on its own merits. When it comes to Ntabiseng, it is a necessity. It is not a luxury for her because, the struggles that she has with the diagnosis of her gender dysphoria. The experts have said that this is an absolute necessity for her to receive. In fact, even the Correctional Services conceded that because she wasn't receiving this, she had what's the word I'm looking for? She had resorted to actually getting these hormones on her own, which is dangerous and just goes to show of the severity of the need for her to actually receive the proper medication. So it is quite eminent for her particular case. And I think the prioritization should be taken on a case-by-case basis.
Mm. And, you know, you're mentioning also affirming the identity that she, you know, truly believes she is as well. And of course, all have a right to dignity and still constitutional rights too. But there is the notion as well that you do lose some of your rights when you become a criminal and you become convicted as a criminal and sentenced to a jail.
Well, that is true. That's a fair point. But when you are convicted, you are also placed at a vulnerability. Your vulnerability is increased by being placed in a correctional center. And there is an obligation to the state to provide necessary interventions. And the crux of Nthabiseng's case is not just for her, in fact, and it goes beyond just the allowance or the affording of gender health care. It is at the crux of it, the treatment that she has received at the correctional center, where her name is not being used, the challenge of her pronouns not being identified or respected, her not being allowed to present herself as a woman. So the challenges that she's facing are far-reaching, and gender-affirming healthcare is something that would alleviate her struggles greatly to be able to feel like a woman.
Yeah, and that point of that you then become more vulnerable when you send to correctional services, I guess the easier outcome would be maybe then don't commit crime.
I think that would be reducing it to the fact that people who commit crimes then lose all their human rights, which is not, in fact, the truth, right? They are still humans. At the end of the day, we have a correctional services, which is aimed at, rehabilitating people. And if people who are placed in correctional services and in a vulnerable situation are not able to receive the necessary treatment or healthcare that they require, what do we expect for them to have, or what do we expect to happen to them once they are released back into society? So I think we need to pay attention to the fact that it's a correctional center that is intended to rehabilitate people back into society.
Nyeleti, thank you so much for your time this evening.